He built a $9 billion empire by being utterly in control. But for 1 hour every week, his most important meeting took place on the floor of his walk-in closet, where he would sit and completely fall apart. No one knew, until the day the cleaning woman's 3-year-old daughter wandered in, found him sobbing, and did the one thing no billion-dollar deal ever could. His name was Elias Thorne. To the world, he was a titan of tech, a figure of cold precision. To the little girl, he was just the sad man in the big room full of suits. This is the true story of how the most powerful man in the room was found and quietly saved by the person everyone else overlooked. And it all began not with a boardroom coup or a market crash, but with a simple, unlatched door. That door led into the private wing of a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of the Aurora Tower, the shimmering skyscraper that had been Elias Thorne's first billion-dollar project. The space was a monument to control. Every bookshelf was arranged by color and height. Every modern art piece was positioned according to a lighting plan. The silence was not accidental. It was engineered, absorbed by acres of custom soundproofing. This was the environment Elias had built to master the world outside. And it was the environment that was slowly suffocating him. On one side of that silence was Elias Thorne, age 34, the founder and sole shareholder of Thorne Dynamics, a company valued at $9.2 billion. He had been on the cover of Forbes, called a prodigy, a visionary. But inside the penthouse, those titles were just words on magazines he kept in a drawer. His real life had been partitioned into two eras, before the accident and after. 18 months ago, his wife, Clara, a cellist, had been killed by a drunk driver on her way home from a rehearsal. The world saw a widower who returned to work after a month, who acquired 2 new companies within a year. What they did not see was the man who, every Thursday at precisely 7 p.m., would enter his walk-in closet, close the door, and collapse. He had a system. He would first change out of his suit. Then he would slide down the wall between a rack of bespoke jackets and a cabinet of watches, wrap his arms around his knees, and weep silently until he could not breathe. The episode would last exactly 1 hour. At 8 p.m., he would stand, smooth his hair, change into a fresh shirt, and walk back out into the penthouse as if nothing had happened. It was the only crack in his armor, and he had sealed it off from the entire world. On the other side of the silence was Maya Ross, 28 years old, a single mother who had been cleaning the Thorne penthouse for 4 months, the longest any housekeeper had lasted in over a year. She arrived every Tuesday and Friday at 6 a.m. Her daughter, Chloe, was 3 years and 4 months old. The babysitter, an unreliable cousin, had flaked again that spring, and Maya had run out of options. So she started bringing Chloe with her, letting her sleep on a pallet of blankets in the staff kitchenette, praying she wouldn't wake up or wander off. This job paid 4 times her others. Losing it was not an option. Maya's life was a study in precise margins. She calculated her bus fare to the dime. She knew which generic brands tasted almost like the real thing. She had not bought herself a new item of clothing in 2 years. The thick, luxurious silence of the penthouse felt to her like a physical substance, something heavy she had to push through with her mop and vacuum. She saw Elias only as a fleeting presence, the click of a door closing, the faint scent of his cologne in a hallway she had just cleaned. They had never spoken. According to the strict instructions left by his previous executive assistant, she was not to acknowledge him unless directly addressed. She was to be a ghost. And for months, she was. The penthouse operated on a set of immutable rules, more rigid than any corporate policy. No music, no unannounced visits to the private study or the primary bedroom closet. All communications were to be left on a notepad on the kitchen island. Meals, prepared by a delivery service, were to be placed outside the study door at appointed times. Maya had seen those trays, hours later, still sitting untouched, the food growing cold under silver cloches. She noted it the same way she noted everything, with quiet, observant precision. It was her job to see without being seen. Elias, meanwhile, was unraveling in increments only a spreadsheet could love. He missed 3 consecutive quarterly earnings calls, having his CFO read statements instead. He declined a meeting with the Secretary of Commerce. His board, a collection of nervous old money and ambitious new money, began sending carefully worded emails, their subject lines hovering in his inbox like unanswered questions. He ignored them. The only thing that felt real was the crushing weight of Thursday at 7 p.m. and the unbearable relief that followed. He was, though he would never say it, desperately lonely, a specific, gilded type of loneliness where every person you meet is either an employee, a rival, or a sycophant. His friends had faded away after Clara's funeral, unsure how to talk to the young widower who was also a billionaire. He hadn't returned their calls anyway. He had convinced himself he preferred the isolation, the control, but the silence in the penthouse had begun to shift from peaceful to predatory. It was in this atmosphere, thick with unsaid grief and unspoken struggle, that a tiny variable was introduced. Chloe was a child of quiet resilience. She had her mother's watchful eyes and a calm demeanor that made her seem older than her years. On her fourth visit to the penthouse, she awoke before Maya had finished the east wing. Instead of crying, she simply stood up, tucked her worn stuffed whale under her arm, and pushed open the unlatched kitchenette door. She padded barefoot into the vast, cool living room, a space larger than her entire apartment. She did not touch anything. She just looked, her head tilted back to see the ceiling that seemed to disappear into light. Elias, leaving his study for coffee, froze in the hallway entrance. He saw a small child in a faded pink nightgown standing in the center of his immaculate living room, holding a toy. His first reaction was not anger, but a kind of cognitive shock. An intruder, a tiny, profound breach of protocol. He said nothing. He simply watched, a statue in a $5,000 suit. Chloe turned and saw him. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him with an open, assessing gaze, the way one might look at a large, unfamiliar piece of furniture. Then she lifted her stuffed whale slightly, as if showing it to him, and turned back to examining the room. Maya found them like that 30 seconds later, her heart slamming against her ribs. She rushed in, sweeping Chloe into her arms with a torrent of hushed apologies. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry," she got out. "It won't happen again, I promise." Her voice trembled. Elias finally moved. He shook his head once, a short, sharp motion. "See that it doesn't," he said, his voice flat and cold. He turned and walked away, the sound of his leather soles on the marble floor echoing like a verdict. Maya held Chloe tight, her face burning with humiliation. She spent the rest of her shift waiting for a termination email that never came. But the air had changed. A line had been crossed. And the following Thursday, as 7 p.m. approached, Elias Thorne walked toward his closet, unaware that the same unlatched door that had released a child into his living room was now about to swing the other way and let her into the most guarded room of all. He didn't hear the door open. The first thing he was aware of, through the haze of his own stifled tears, was the faint scent of baby shampoo, and then the small, warm pressure of a hand on his knee. Elias Thorne froze, the raw, shuddering sobs caught in his throat. He lifted his head from his hands, his vision blurred, and there she was, Chloe, standing beside him in her pink nightgown, her stuffed whale under one arm, her other hand resting on his knee. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She looked at his wet face with a profound, unblinking curiosity, as if she were studying a complex but interesting puzzle. He should have shouted. He should have stood up, marched her out, fired her mother on the spot. Every protocol, every instinct of self-preservation screamed at him to do just that. But he was paralyzed, not by fear, but by the sheer, disarming normality of her gaze. She was not afraid of him. In his broken state, she saw only another person, and she was concerned. "You sad?" she asked, her voice a soft ripple in the silent, carpeted closet. The question, so simple, so direct, dismantled him. It was the question no analyst dared ask, no board member would consider, no friend remembered to pose. His throat worked, but no sound came out. He managed a stiff, jerky nod. Chloe considered this for a moment. Then she did something extraordinary. She sat down cross-legged on the floor beside him, letting her whale tumble into her lap. She didn't try to hug him. She didn't pat his back. She simply sat in solidarity with his sadness. And then she began to hum. It was a tuneless, wavering little stream of sound, the same few notes repeated. It was the lullaby her mother sang every night, a wordless melody meant to soothe. She hummed it softly, staring at the row of polished shoes in front of them, as if this were the most natural thing in the world to do. For Elias, the world narrowed to that sound. The cold, engineered silence of his penthouse was finally, completely pierced. He listened, his breathing gradually slowing to match the rhythm of her humming. The tight, suffocating knot in his chest didn't vanish, but it loosened just enough to let him breathe. They sat like that for 4 minutes. Neither moved. It was Maya who broke the spell. She appeared in the closet doorway, her face pale with terror, having searched the entire penthouse in a panic. "Chloe, oh my God, Mr. Thorne, Her words died when she saw the scene, her daughter sitting peacefully beside her sobbing employer. The world tilted. Elias looked up at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the impending ruin of her life reflected there. He did something he had not done in front of an employee in 18 months. He took a deliberate, shaky breath and wiped his face with the back of his hand. "It's all right," he said, his voice rough but quiet. "She's fine." Maya could only stare, unable to process this. She reached for Chloe. "Come on, baby, we have to go." Chloe stood up, picking up her wail. She looked at Elias one more time, gave a small, decisive nod, and took her mother's hand. Maya pulled her from the room, throwing one last, bewildered glance over her shoulder before the closet door clicked shut, leaving Elias alone once more in the silence, which now felt different. It was no longer absolute. It had been shared. Following Tuesday, Maya arrived for her shift vibrating with nervous tension. She expected to be met by a security guard or termination letter taped to the door. Instead, the penthouse was as silent as ever. She cleaned with manic focus, keeping Chloe tethered to her side in the kitchenette. But halfway through the morning, she noticed something. On the kitchen island, next to the usual notepad, was a small, sealed envelope with her name written on it in a sharp, precise hand. Her stomach dropped. This was it. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was not a termination notice, but a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, a handwritten note. It read, "Ensure she has coloring materials. The east window alcove has better light. E.T., that was all. No apology, no explanation, no reference to the closet, just an instruction that acknowledged Chloe's presence and a small, stunning gesture of allowance. Maya read it 3 times. She looked at Chloe, who was stacking clean measuring cups on the floor. A permission slip, she thought. A wildly unorthodox, utterly baffling permission slip. She put the note in her pocket and finished her shift in a daze. The next day, she brought a small box of crayons and a pad of paper. Chloe, of course, immediately understood the new rules. The alcove became her studio. She would draw for hours, her small form curled on the wide windowsill overlooking the city. She drew whales and buses and her mother and strange, blobby shapes she identified as happy clouds. And one day, she drew 2 figures, a tall, stick-like man with a sad line for a mouth and a small girl holding a blobby animal. She presented this drawing to Elias as he passed the alcove on his way to the study. He stopped, looked at the paper held up in her earnest hands. He did not take it. "What is it?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "You," Chloe said, pointing to the tall stick figure. "And me, and whale." She pointed to the blobby shape. Elias looked from the drawing to her face. He reached out, took the paper between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a delicate specimen. He studied it. "I see," he said finally. Then he turned and walked to his study, the drawing held stiffly at his side. Maya, watching from the hallway, held her breath. He didn't pin it to a board. He placed it carefully in the top drawer of his desk. A fragile, wordless routine began. Chloe would leave offerings, a cracker from her snack on the edge of his desk, a dandelion she'd picked from a crack in the building's rooftop garden planter. One time, a sparkly sticker she'd gotten from a pediatrician's visit, which she pressed firmly onto the face of his platinum wristwatch. He never removed it. He would simply glance at it throughout the day, the glittery unicorn smiling up from beside the crisp numerals. Maya cautiously began to see the penthouse through a new lens. She noticed the portrait of a beautiful, dark-haired woman with a cello, Clara, that had been turned to face the wall in the music room. She saw the untouched, grand piano covered in a fine layer of dust that she was forbidden to clean. She pieced together the timeline from whispers among the building's other staff. The tragic accident, the swift, silent return to work, the gradual retreat from public life. She stopped seeing just a difficult, cold billionaire. She started seeing a man living in a museum of a life that had ended, surrounded by artifacts of a happiness he could no longer touch. The external pressures, however, were building like a thunderhead. One afternoon, Maya overheard a heated phone call through the study door, which was left slightly ajar. It was Elias' attorney, a man named Robert Vance. The words were sharp, clear. Elias, the board is planning a special session. They're talking about invoking the incapacity clause. Your lack of engagement is being construed as instability. If you don't appear on the next investor call, visibly and vocally in command, they will move. Do you understand what that means? They can vote to install an interim CEO. There was a long silence, then Elias' voice, low and cold, "Let them try." "You're not listening. This isn't about trying. They will succeed. Your shares are in a trust. If a majority of the independent board votes that you are mentally or physically unfit to lead, the trust provisions allow for a temporary fiduciary. You could lose control of your own company, Elias, not in a hostile takeover, but in a boardroom coup on grounds of grief." The line went dead. Elias had hung up. Maya slipped away, her heart hammering. The stakes were no longer just emotional. They were financial, colossal, and imminent. The entire empire, the source of the very wealth that built this silent prison, was now under direct threat, and the man at the center of it all was in no state to defend it. The tension manifested physically in the penthouse. Elias' Thursday disappearances became longer. The untouched meal trays multiplied. Maya found him one morning asleep at his desk, his head on his arms, the computer screen dark. He looked younger in sleep and utterly defeated. She did not wake him. She simply placed a fresh cup of coffee on a coaster nearby and left, closing the door softly behind her. It was Chloe who inadvertently triggered the next crisis. She found Elias in the music room, standing motionless before the shrouded piano. He wasn't crying. He was just staring, his hands clenched at his sides. Chloe walked over, her wail dragging behind her. She looked at the piano, then at his face. "Does it hurt?" she asked, not specifying what it was. Elias closed his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. Chloe thought about this. Then she reached out, grabbed a corner of the dust cover and pulled. The cloth slid off in a soft asterisk whoosh asterisk, revealing the polished ebony piano underneath. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. Elias flinched as if struck. "Maybe it wants to sing," Chloe said, as if explaining something very simple. She reached a small hand out and pressed a single random key. A clear, resonant middle C filled the silent room, the note hanging in the air, beautiful and stark. The sound seemed to shatter something in Elias. He didn't yell, he didn't move. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, followed by another. He looked from the piano to the little girl who had, with terrifying innocence, exposed the very heart of the wound. He had not allowed that instrument to make a sound since the night Clara died. Maya, drawn by the piano note, arrived in the doorway. She saw the uncovered piano, the tear on Elias' face, her daughter looking up at him. For a moment, time suspended. This was no longer a contained breach of protocol. This was a direct confrontation with the core of his grief, facilitated by her child. The consequences, she knew, could now swing in any direction, catastrophic or redemptive. And the clock was ticking, not just on their fragile truce, but on the billion-dollar empire crumbling around them. The board's special session was in 72 hours. The note from the board arrived by private courier the next morning. It was not an invitation. It was a summons, a single line, "Special session, tomorrow, 10 a.m. regarding leadership continuity." Elias read it at the kitchen island, his face impassive. Then he did something Maya had never seen. He crumpled the heavy paper into a tight ball and dropped it into the sink, where it landed with a dull, final thud. He walked away without a word, but his shoulders held a new kind of tension, the posture of a man walking to a gallows. Maya cleaned the sink later, fishing out the damp ball of paper. She smoothed it enough to read the words. Her blood ran cold. The incapacity clause. It was real, and it was happening now. Her mind raced. If the board took over, everything would change. New management would audit everything, including domestic staff. They would discover she'd been bringing her child to work for months, a flagrant violation of any corporate property policy. She would be fired instantly, with cause, losing any hope of a reference. The fragile life she'd built would collapse. That afternoon, a different kind of intruder arrived. Two men in dark suits, sent by the board's governance committee. They were polite, lethal. They asked to review security access logs and recent vendor invoices. They explained, conducting a routine review of estate management. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. They were building their case, looking for evidence of neglect or irrational behavior. Maya watched from a hallway as one of the men stood for a long time in the doorway of the music room, staring at the uncovered piano, a slight frown on his face. He took a note on his tablet. Elias retreated to his study and locked the door. The silence from within was total, absolute, no phone calls, no clicking of a keyboard. It was the silence of surrender. Maya, driven by a desperation she didn't fully understand, began a quiet rebellion of her own. She started leaving 2 coffee cups on the tray outside his door instead of 1. She didn't knock. She just left them there, a small signal of solidarity in the language of the house. The first day, both cups were still there, cold, at the end of her shift. The second day, one was gone. Chloe, oblivious to the corporate siege, continued her missions. She found Elias not in his study, but in the walk-in closet again, though he wasn't crying this time. He was just sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, staring into the middle distance. She sat beside him, her wail in her lap. "Men in suits are here," she announced, as if reporting the weather. "I know," Elias said, his voice hollow. "They look like the pictures in your magazines, but frownier." A ghost of something, not a smile but its precursor, touched Elias' mouth. "Yes." Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mom says grown-ups have meetings when they're scared to talk." Elias turned his head to look at her. The child's perception was a laser beam. "What does your mom do when she's scared?" he asked, the question surprising him as much as it did Maya, who was listening, frozen, just outside the doorway. Chloe thought hard. "She hums, and she holds my hand really tight, and she says, 'We'll figure it out.'" She held out her small hand to him, not taking his, just offering it. Elias looked at that small, open hand. He did not take it, but he nodded slowly. "She's a smart woman," he said, almost to himself. That night Elias did not sleep. He sat in the dark of his study, the city lights glittering like a field of cold diamonds below. He thought about the board, men he had chosen, whose fortunes he had made. He thought about Clara and the unbearable silence of the piano. He thought about a cold cup of coffee left faithfully outside his door. And he thought about a small, warm hand offered in a closet. For the first time in 18 months, the crushing weight of his grief was joined by another feeling, a fierce, protective anger, not for himself, but for the 2 quiet lives that had somehow become entangled with his own. They would be collateral damage in the board's clean, clinical coup. The morning of the special session dawned gray and damp. Maya arrived early, her stomach in knots. The penthouse was preternaturally still. The men in suits were already there, setting up a secure video link in the formal dining room. Elias emerged from his bedroom at 9:15. He was wearing a suit, but it was the same one from the day before, slightly rumpled. He hadn't shaved. He looked, for the first time, less like a billionaire and more like a man who had been fighting a war in a locked room. 9:45, he walked into the dining room and closed the double doors. Maya hovered in the kitchen, straining to hear. The low murmur of voices began, punctuated by the sharper tones of Robert Vance, his attorney, trying to mediate. Then a new voice, loud and clear through the door, the lead independent director, a woman named Charlotte Finch. "Elias, the concern isn't about your loss. We all grieved for Clara. The concern is about your prolonged and total disengagement. You are the CEO. This company requires leadership, not a ghost." Maya heard Elias' response, low and unintelligible. Then Charlotte Finch again, her voice colder. "We have reports of irregular activity, unsupervised access. A child's drawing was found in your desk during our review. This is not the environment of a focused executive." They were using Chloe. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. They were framing a child's innocent kindness as evidence of his instability. The betrayal was so profound it stole her breath. Inside the dining room, Elias stood up so suddenly his chair scraped loudly on the floor. "Get out," he said, his voice quiet but vibrating with an intensity that silenced the video call. "Elias, be reasonable," Robert Vance began. "I said get out of my home, all of you. The meeting is over." There was a stunned silence. Then the sound of the board members on screen sputtering protests. Charlotte Finch's face on the monitor was flushed with anger. "If you terminate this session, Elias, we will have no choice but to call an immediate vote." You are proving our point about erratic judgment. Do what you have to do, Elias said, and he turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving his attorney and the two suited men staring after him. He walked straight past Maya in the kitchen without seeing her, went into his study and closed the door, but he did not lock it. The fallout was immediate. Robert Vance left 15 minutes later, his expression grim. The two board representatives packed their equipment, their faces masks of professional disapproval. One of them paused by Maya. "You're the housekeeper?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Ensure Mr. Thorne has no further distractions today. The board will be in touch." The warning was clear. She was a distraction. Chloe was a distraction. Maya felt the ground giving way. It was over. She finished her cleaning on autopilot, tears blurring her vision. She packed Chloe's crayons and whale into their bag. She was wiping down the kitchen island one last time when she heard the study door open. Elias stood there. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. "Maya," he said, "a moment, please." Her heart stopped. This was it, the dismissal. She walked to the study doorway, her head held high, determined not to beg. He didn't invite her in. He just stood there looking at her. "How much do you need?" he asked. The question was so utterly unexpected, she couldn't process it. What? To not work for the next year, to take care of Chloe, to not worry, a number. Maya stared at him, her mind blank. Was he buying her silence, offering a severance to disappear? A fresh wave of humiliation washed over her. "I don't want your money, Mr. Thorne." "I'm not giving it to you," he said, his voice still flat, but with a new undercurrent. "I am asking you what it costs to live, to breathe, because I have forgotten, and I need to remember." The air left the room. He wasn't firing her. He was asking her a foundational question about survival, one he, in his gilded tower, had lost the answer to. It was the most vulnerable thing he had ever said to her. Maya, thrown entirely off balance, heard herself answer with brutal, unvarnished truth. $42,000, she said. "That's rent, food, childcare, bus pass, insurance, for a year of just existing, not getting ahead, just not drowning." Elias nodded, as if she'd given him a crucial data point. 42,000, he repeated. He looked past her into the empty living room. "The board is voting in 1 hour to remove me. They will likely succeed." "Can you stop them?" The question was out before she could stop it. "I don't know," he admitted. Then he looked directly at her. "But if they do, you will be terminated. It will not be my decision. I want you to know that." It was a warning and an apology all in one. Maya nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "And Chloe," he said, her name soft on his lips. Tell her thank you for the drawing." He turned and went back into his study, closing the door softly. Maya stood in the hallway, the number $42,000 echoing in her mind, alongside the image of a billionaire brought to his knees not by a board, but by a child's crayon drawing. She knew then, with certainty, that the vote would go against him. The men in suits, the uncovered piano, the perceived erraticism, it was too much. The empire would fall today. And as she gathered her daughter to leave, she wondered what would become of the broken man they would leave behind in the silent, perfect tomb of his own creation. But as the clock ticked down to the final vote, Elias Thorne was not sitting in silent defeat. He was at his desk, staring at a single, glittery unicorn sticker on the face of a $30,000 watch. And for the first time since his wife died, he was making a plan. The vote was scheduled for 2 o'clock. At 1:58, Elias Thorne did not join the video call. Instead, he sent a single email to the entire board of directors with one attachment. The subject line was clear: "For the record." The attachment was not a financial report or a legal rebuttal. It was a digital scan of a child's crayon drawing. The two stick figures, the sad line for a mouth, the blobby whale. Below it, Elias had typed a short message. It read, "You are correct. I have been distracted. For the past 18 months, I have been distracted by grief, by silence, by the unbearable weight of a piano that does not play." This drawing was given to me by a 3-year-old girl who saw that weight and asked if I was sad. She was the first person in 2 years to ask. She and her mother, who cleans this house and who has shown more loyalty in 4 months than this board has in 4 years, have reminded me of a fundamental truth: Leadership is not about never falling apart. It is about what you do after. The vote is yours. But know this, if you vote me out today, you are not voting out a distracted ghost. You are voting out a man who has just remembered how to see, and I will build something new from that. Sincerely, Elias. He hit send, then he walked out of his study, past a bewildered Maya who was gathering her things to leave, and went to the music room. He sat down at the piano, the instrument his wife had loved. He lifted the fallboard, exposing the keys. He placed his fingers on them, took a shuddering breath, and played a single, clear chord. It was rusty, imperfect, but it was sound. It was music. It was life returning to a dead space. In a conference room 12 blocks away, the board members read the email on their tablets. Charlotte Finch, the lead independent director, stared at the childish drawing on her screen. She was a grandmother of 2. She remembered the death of her own husband 5 years prior. She looked around the table at the other directors, their faces a mixture of confusion and discomfort. The clinical, corporate language of their coup had just been reframed in the stark, human terms of a crayon drawing. The vote was called. It was not unanimous, but it was in favor of giving Elias Thorne 1 more quarter, with conditions. He had to resume all public duties. He had to meet with an executive coach. The margin was slim, but it was enough. The empire for now remained his. Robert Vance called Elias 20 minutes later to deliver the news. Elias listened, said thank you, and hung up. He did not celebrate. He simply sat at the piano for a long time, letting the reality settle. He had not won. He had been granted a stay of execution, and it had been bought not by his business acumen, but by his vulnerability. He found Maya in the foyer, putting on her coat, Chloe already in her stroller. "The vote went my way," he said quietly. Maya turned, her eyes wide with shock and relief. That's wonderful, Mr. Thorne." "Elias," he corrected her. "My name is Elias." He paused, choosing his next words with immense care. "The conditions of their reprieve include a review of household management. They will expect me to let you go, to remove the distraction." Maya's face fell. The reprieve was not for her. She nodded, trying to mask her disappointment. "I understand. We'll go now." "I'm not letting you go," Elias said, his voice firm. "But the arrangement must change. It cannot be a secret. So I am offering you a new position, head of household operations, a formal title, a salary and benefits, and an on-site childcare allowance for Chloe so she is not napping in a closet. She can have the alcove officially." Maya could only stare, her mind struggling to catch up. A salary, benefits. "Yes, and the first order of business in your new role is to hire a piano tuner. The instrument is horribly out of tune." He allowed himself the smallest, most tentative of smiles. It was brief, but it was real. Tears welled in Maya's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. Chloe, from her stroller, looked up at Elias. "You fixed the SAD?" she asked. Elias crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, something he had never done before. "Not fixed," he said, "but you showed me where the tools were. Thank you, Chloe." From that day, the penthouse began a slow, steady metamorphosis. The piano tuner came. A small, bright rug and a bookshelf of children's books appeared in the east alcove, which was now designated Chloe's studio. Maya no longer crept in at 6 a.m. She arrived at 8 with Chloe, and they had breakfast at the kitchen island. Elias joined them sometimes, sipping coffee and listening to Chloe explain her plans for the day. He returned to work, but differently. He was quieter, more deliberate. He began his investor calls with a moment of genuine reflection, sometimes even acknowledging the difficult personal journey of the past year. The markets, skeptical at first, were disarmed by the authenticity. The stock, which had dipped on rumors of instability, began a slow, steady climb. The most profound change was in the rituals. The Thursday evening closet meetings did not stop entirely, but they grew shorter, and sometimes, instead of going to the closet, Elias would go to the music room and play. He was not good, but he was learning. One Thursday, Chloe heard the clumsy notes and wandered in. She climbed onto the bench beside him, her legs dangling. She didn't try to play. She just sat and listened, her head leaning lightly against his arm. He didn't stop. He played through the mistakes, and when he finished a simple scale, she said, "That was a good song." He looked down at her. "It was just scales." She shrugged. "Sounded like a song to me." Maya, watching from the doorway, felt a peace she had not known in years. The silence of the penthouse was no longer cold. It was a comfortable quiet, often broken by the sounds of life. A child's laughter, the plink of piano keys, the easy rhythm of three people learning how to be a family of sorts. 6 months later, on a bright Tuesday morning, Elias called Maya into his study. On his desk was a single envelope. "This is for you," he said. Maya's heart fluttered. Was this it? A bonus? A termination after all? She opened it. Inside was a check made out to her for $42,000, and a note. It read, "For a year of not drowning, and for the year after of learning to swim. This is not a gift. It is an investment in you, Elias." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I can't accept this." "You can," he said, "because I am also giving you every Friday off, effective immediately, to attend business classes at the community college. The head of my household operations should have a degree in business management if she wants one. The tuition is covered. Consider it professional development." Maya was speechless. He was not just giving her money, he was giving her a future, a path, a way up. She managed a choked "thank you." Elias nodded. "You and Chloe have given me back my life. This is me giving you yours." That summer, the penthouse hosted its first social event in 2 years, a small dinner. The guests were Maya, Chloe, and Mrs. Henderson, the elderly part-time cook who had stayed through everything. They ate in the dining room, at the table that was no longer a monument to loneliness. Chloe, in a new yellow dress, told a long, convoluted story about whale and a spaceship. Elias listened, genuinely laughed, and when she was done, he high-fived her. It was not a fairy tale ending. Elias still had bad days. The grief for Clara was a permanent resident in his heart, but it had moved from the master suite to a quieter room, one he could visit without collapsing. He still worked long hours, but he also took breaks to walk with Chloe in the building's rooftop garden, which he had ordered to be replanted with roses, Clara's favorite flower. The board stopped talking about incapacity clauses. The company thrived. And in a quarterly report, in a section usually reserved for financials, Elias included a single, unusual line: "Our greatest assets are not on our balance sheet. They are the human connections that remind us why we build, why we lead, and why we get back up." The story of the billionaire, the maid, and the toddler never made the news. There was no scandal, no dramatic expose. Just three people in a penthouse who, by a series of small, unlatched doors and unguarded moments, found their way out of separate silences and into a shared, imperfect, healing sound. And as the first anniversary of that day in the closet approached, Elias Thorne did something that would have been unthinkable a year prior. He asked Maya and Chloe to move in, not as staff, but as family. He had the apartment next door, which he owned, renovated into a bright, warm space connected to the penthouse by a single, always unlocked door. It was an offer, not a demand. And when Maya, after a week of thinking, said yes, the three of them celebrated with pizza on the floor of the living room, the city lights twinkling below, the piano sitting quiet but ready, and the walk-in closet used only for clothes. So what is the true currency of a life? Is it the billions, the penthouse, the power, or is it the quiet moment when a child offers a hand in a dark closet and the courage it takes to accept it? This story was never about wealth. It was about poverty, the poverty of connection, the scarcity of genuine sight, the bankruptcy of a soul that has everything except a reason to feel any of it. Elias Thorne had to lose almost every external thing: his wife, his perceived invincibility, the respect of his board, before he could be found. He had to hit the floor of a walk-in closet, surrounded by the literal fabrics of his success, to discover that his most valuable asset was not on any ledger. It was the capacity to be seen and to be softened by an act of unasked-for kindness. We live in a world that often celebrates the stoic, the invulnerable, the figures who seem to command reality from behind a wall of glass. But this story asks us to consider what thrives in the cracks of that glass. The healing that doesn't come from a strategic plan, but from a crayon drawing. The loyalty that isn't bought, but earned through shared silence and a second cup of coffee left without a word. Perhaps the most radical act of leadership is not never breaking, but allowing the right person to witness the break. And perhaps the most profound wisdom is not spoken in boardrooms, but hummed tunelessly by a 3-year-old who hasn't yet learned that some people are supposed to be unreachable. If this story found a crack in your own wall, if it reminded you of a time you were the one on the floor or the one who sat beside someone who was, then you understand why we tell these tales, because the narratives that change us are rarely the loudest ones. They are the quiet ones, the ones about the bandage with the cartoon star left on for a full day, the unlocked door between two apartments, the piano that begins to play again, badly but beautifully, because someone remembered that music exists. This is the space where we hold those stories. If you believe in the power of the quiet moment, the unexpected connection, the healing that looks nothing like you thought it would, then subscribe. Join our community. Leave a comment below about a time when a small, unexpected kindness rearranged something in your world. Share this with someone who needs to remember that it's okay to not be okay, and that help often comes from the most surprising quarter. We don't shout here, we don't chase the noise. We simply listen for the hum in the silent room and we pass it on. Thank you for listening.